Good morning. Graham Healy. It's Sunday the 24th of May. Now just a quick one on freedom of speech. Now I'm looking at the American First Amendment on freedom of speech. Now you get, recently I won't even bother repeating this idiot's name, but you've got the it's Queensland. It shouldn't have been happening in Queensland, that's for certain. There's something to do with tourism. Queensland, a female, either manager or something, blurted out that Donald Trump should be assassinated. What you should do with her is deport her to the US and hand her over to the Department of Justice and let them handle what she said. And then I'm just reading on the, various comments, and some people quote freedom of speech. Now, these morons are quoting freedom of speech. Best just look it up, because I'll just read it to you. This is what happens with this. I don't know whether it's this generation, whether or not they've had their brains extracted along the way and had lobotomies or something like that. Certainly seems like it, doesn't it? Especially when it comes to so-called free Palestine. Freedom of speech, and I'm reading it direct off the internet. I just clicked on it then just to make certain you get your facts right. And these days, Google has got AI, so the references are pretty accurate, actually, and you can get that information far quicker than you could before by so-called research. Anyway, freedom of speech is guaranteed by the First Amendment in the United States. It explicitly prohibits the government from making laws that abridge the freedom of speech. The exact text of the Constitution reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting and establishing the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." Now, it's the same in Australia, theoretically. That what it protects, verbal and written expression, protects spoken words, published articles, books, and symbolic acts like flag burning or kneeling. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that. No, I don't agree with that part of it. Artistic expression, well, this is Google again. Artistic expression, government criticism. Now, protect spoken words, published articles, books, and symbolic acts like flag burning or kneeling. Those two ones there, I believe that should be revised. However, I'm talking the United States now, important limitations. The right to free speech is not absolute. The US Supreme Court has established that the government can restrict certain categories of speech, including defamation, true threats, and speech that incites imminent lawless action. Now, that idiot in Queensland tourism, that's a threat, and speech that incites imminent lawless action. That's a crime. Obscenity and child pornography, fraud and perjury. So when you talk about free speech, I'll put the caveat in about flag burning, and that should actually be made legal. Now, this I'm talking the US. Hopefully it's illegal in Australia, but you've got to look up the law about it, because there's so many different permutations of these statements. But when it comes to actually physical violence or incitement to physical violence. That also covers, in Australia, it's covered quite well in the right to protest. We haven't got a right to incite violence. Now, you have a look at what happened leading up to the Bondi massacres. We had 2.5 years of putting up with these paid idiots on the Free Palestine, which equals actually supporting Hamas. That's all they're doing. And the scenes across Sydney Harbour Bridge where they were flying pictures of, holding pictures of the Ayatollahs, mass murderers, holding flags of terrorists, flying flags of terrorists, and actually one of the terrorists of the Bondi massacre was actually on that march across the bridge. So you had really illegal marches because their purpose was nothing about, so-called refugees in Gaza, which is just complete BS. It was all about inciting violence against Jews. Now, isn't it strange that what I call the resurrection of the Hitler spirit in Australia, UK, Europe, and Canada especially, and some parts of US, this anti-Jewish sentiment, which has gone over the top, is just like a repeat of World War II with Hitler et al. So it's definitely a spiritual thing, and those that turn against Israel will be cursed. Israel's not going anywhere, and I forget what the name of this guy is in the US. He's a sort of like a commentator / comedian, but he really does, and he's not necessarily pro-Trump either, but he definitely is pro-facts regarding Israel. And you'll know who I'm talking about. You know, he just calls out the lefties, and he is left-leaning, but he calls them out for reality on the facts on Israel. Now, I don't have to go over the facts on Israel, but here's one little fact. They've never, ever started a war in the Middle East. I'll just repeat that. They've never started a war in the Middle East. Yes, they've finished them, but it's always been after they've been attacked. So, everyone has the right to self-defense. But why is it that as soon as Israel does something, suddenly you've got all these paid idiots protesting? How many paid idiots did you see protesting against the 1 million people who were murdered in the streets in Iran since 1979? Or more recently, 40,000 people turned up to protest and state their freedom of speech, and they got shot in the streets, up to 40,000 in Iran. Thank God President Trump is nailing them, which he should. He's the greatest president of all time, there's no question about that. And in Nigeria, now I've brought people to Australia from Nigeria. I know what it's like in Nigeria, right? Firsthand. And where's the protests about literally thousands at least, maybe 100,000 of Christians being slaughtered by Islamic terrorists? Not a one. I haven't seen one marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge protesting against the slaughter of Christians and human rights for Nigerians. Nigerians are very good people. But who defends them? Donald Trump sends a army division over there, the Air Force over there, and eliminates one of the key terrorists. So you've got to really take stock of yourself if your thought patterns are anti-Trump, actually. And actually, when Trump Tower, and I believe Trump Tower will go ahead in the Gold Coast once we get rid of the Albanese pro-terrorism government. But can you imagine, Trump, who, again, doesn't get paid to be president. He donates his money to the veterans or something like that. You compare Trump with anyone else, I'd like to hear about it, that's doing what he's doing, achieving what he's achieving. including financially, including the sovereignty of the US, making it a superpower again. Now, it just reminds me of the building of Trump Tower in the Gold Coast. You had all these basically zombie dead idiots going on about we don't want it here. Well, you know, I think the majority of people would want a multi-billion-dollar building that's going to provide employment, accommodation, and be an international staging of events and everything in the Gold Coast, and put it back on the map. I don't know whether you've been down to Main Beach. The last time I was down there, it almost looked like a ghetto. So, you know, you need to really dress up that part of the Gold Coast, don't you? You know, maybe it's been thrown into the bikie gangs or something down there. So, you know, there was this petition that went out. No doubt the people signing that petition were probably, you know, those people on the dole around the beach there somewhere. But, you know, I believe that Trump Tower will go ahead in Queensland. At least, look, there are things that, you know, myself as a Christian don't agree with the Premier, but I'll tell you what, Healy definitely is pro-Queensland, you know. So, you know, you've got to look at how many boxes they tick, and compared to Labor, Healy's just about walking on water as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing is that he's a local Ingham boy, and, you know, I'm from a cane farming community in Meena Creek. Well, that's my grandfather was there, and the other grandfather was from Gordonvale near Cairns as a boxing trainer and racehorse trainer. So I'm from up north, and I know what it's like to grow up in a sugarcane farming community, and you know, where basically when people talk about multiculturalism and all the rest of it, or I call it multi-ethnic races. In North Queensland, we had the Italians, we had actually a lot of Sikh Indians were cane cutters up there as well. We got a lot of respect in Queensland for the Sikh Indians and for the Italians. You know, the Italians are great hard-working people, the Greeks. And, of course, Healy's father's Italian, and he's of Italian descent. So we've had some really good, hard-working immigrants. My grandfather was actually from, you know, his father was from Germany, and my other side of the equation was from Ireland, the Fighting Irish, literally. So I just want to finish off with this. If you say something online, like this idiot did with it from the Queensland Tourist Resort, or Tourist Company, or whatever the hell they call themselves, words have power. So these liberals, what I call the non-conservatives, and I'm not talking far right, all this BS about, oh, they're extreme right, like Albanese claims that Pauline Hanson's, you know, far right, that anyone who's siding with Pauline Hanson must be on the dark side. See, he just said that recently, by the way, but the thing is, Albanese's on the dark side, you know that. You see, people can talk all sorts of BS, and the test is simple. By their fruit, you know who they are. They can sound good. They can say everything they say sounds like good double talk, like Albanese. Oh, yes, you know, we won't have any capital gains tax. We won't have any death tax. As a matter of fact, we'll be giving you, you know, $300 off your electricity bill and blah, blah, blah. Everything he said's been a lie, bar nothing. Oh, we changed position. No, you've just lied. So, you know, you look at it biblically, and this is what the Lord said about liars. I'll just throw it to this. It's what the Lord says about liars. That, and he's talking to the Pharisees, you know, and he said, you really represent your father. And the Pharisees, you know, look this statement up. I can't remember the exact scripture in Matthew there somewhere. But the Lord said, talking to the Pharisees, basically giving them a serve. His freedom of speech to the Pharisees got him crucified, actually. But now that's real freedom of speech. Never heard anyone, never said anything really against him except called them for what they were in a true sense. And he said to the Pharisees, he said, "You're representing your father." And they said, "Well, our father's Abraham." And the Lord turned to them and said, "Your father's the devil. He was a liar from the beginning and a father of liars." Now, you look at Albanese. I'm not talking about Albanese, the person. I'm talking about Albanese spiritually. You look at what he's doing. He's lying. Everything he says is a lie. He aligns himself with terrorists, i.e., the proof of that is he signed that agreement to recognise Palestine, which is basically ruled by one of the worst terrorist organisations in the world. So you have a look at their fruit. He's really anti-Israel, and so is Penny Wong and all the rest of them. And they're pro-Hamas. The proof of that is that they brought ISIS brides back to Australia. Who in their right mind would bring terrorists' brides and their siblings back from beheading people and naively state or say that they're going to rehab them or something? And then all the way denying they had anything to do with it, with bringing or repatriating these terrorist brides. So mysteriously they got Australian passports delivered to them illegally. We've got to get rid of Albanese. And I've posted on my website, Rise Up Australia, Brisbane 2025, there's been this absolutely, I had tears in my eyes with this, absolutely fantastic AI mini-movie on Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce and Malcolm Roberts basically becoming the government of Australia. Now, I'll finish this off Sunday morning with this. I believe that One Nation will take at least the Senate, and don't worry about an election being 2 years away. Forget that. Albanese's got this country to the point where we're in rebellion for certain, peaceful rebellion, without making statements like this idiot did from Queensland, that threatening the life of the the President of the United States, that she should be charged for that, without question. And I'll just finish on this. You know, you have the right to freedom of speech, but you do not have the right to threaten violence. You do not have the right, like they did for 2.5 years in this country under a weak government, with, I mean, the Free Palestine mob. That should have been shut down immediately. And even to this day, when they carry on, basically they should be arrested. And look, I feel that, and a lot of the security people say this actually. I was just listening to one a while ago who was the head copper for the Link Cafe terrorism situation, where he was the one who led the charge, and he said he just can't understand what's going on. Well, not that, he said it's just totally unacceptable. And of course, right across the board, it's unacceptable. So, just as this AI mini movie, you must watch that if you haven't already. Go on to Rise Up Australia Brisbane 2025. Go, type in the AI on the blog, Pauline Hanson's Vision for Australia, and it'll come up. You'll laugh in one respect, but you'll sort of cry in one respect, because they've nailed it. They've absolutely nailed it. In one of the scenes, they made Ben Robert Johnson the Commissioner of Federal Police. That nothing could be better than that. So, on the downside, we're at the point that we must take back Australia. We must repossess Australia, take it out of the hands of the Islamic terrorists and of the communists, i.e. Albanese et al. and put it back into the hands of people with common sense. And as Barnaby Joyce says, we need to restore Australia to an economic powerhouse, which will take about 5 years with the right people in power. So that's Graham Healy over and out. Just remember your words. Now, I might still, at one point before I did all the stock market trading, basically another university degree with that, an equivalent of, I was actually booked in to be a lawyer at Bond University. I may still do that. I've run quite a few court cases, just represented myself, won every single one of them. And in law, basically, it's all about the particular parameters around the particular cases. Now, basically, it's like this. It's like if you've got your own property, there's certain laws regarding the parameter of that property, and that's what law's like. It has certain boundary lines or guidelines around a particular issue. Like an example, free speech. The boundary line around that is that you're not to incite violence. The right to protest and all this against the government and what have you. There is the caveat is you do not incite violence or of any description. The left incites violence. There's no question. And so that's the caveat. You've got to understand where the law's limits are. But the problem with Australia, the Australian government at the moment, is they're pro-terrorists, they're terrorist appeasers, and they do not adhere to the rule of law. They're basically lawless or gutless. And, that, for instance, I'll give you an example. Now, apparently, they're running the so-called Nazi Party. Well, I never knew that existed in Australia, but apparently it does. In Melbourne somewhere, or Adelaide, or down there, down in the capital of communism, Melbourne. And they're running them. They're about to ban, the Albanese government's about to ban the extreme right so-called Nazi Party. And fair enough too, they should be completely banned and actually put in jail or not asylum, but in detention over on Christmas Island. That'd make a great place to put these characters. But the elephant in the room, they're all talking about this extreme right so-called Nazi Party. Well, what about Islam? What about the elephant in the room? Radical Islam, or even Islam generally, says nothing. What about the group that were responsible for the Bondi massacre, for the 7th of October massacres, for something like about 50,000 terrorism attacks around the world since 9/11, and 1,400 years of terrorism globally. 1,400 years of expansion and global terrorism, i.e. Islam. Not a word. No problem there. We've got to do something about it, folks. And the only way is a change of government, and the only party that is worthy of that responsibility is One Nation under Pauline Hanson, and now the political heavyweight Barnaby Joyce. Now, people can criticise Barnaby. I've been following Barnaby probably for at least as long as he's been in Parliament, for 21 years. I'm 71 this year, and I've followed Malcolm Roberts with great interest as well. I've run a few meetings with Malcolm Roberts, actually. And, Pauline, I haven't run meetings with Pauline yet, been at meetings with her, but the combination, the dots are all joining for One Nation. And now they've got Barnaby on board, who was 2 times Vice Prime Minister. They got political weight. They got political heavyweight on board now. And you're seeing some former Liberals wanting to join One Nation or joining One Nation, and you're starting to see a flow of common sense true liberals. Now, when people say, what is a liberal? I'll just mention it. None other than Sir Robert Menzies defined what liberalism, communism, and socialism was, or liberalism, socialism, and communism. And basically, the Liberal Party is no longer the Liberal Party. One Nation represents what the Liberal Party used to be, or what used to stand for. And this is what this is the definition of a Liberal Party, or in the United States it'd be, Trump's party, the Republicans, the pure Republicans, I'd call them. So a liberalism represents the freedom of the individual, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion. Right? And in that, the freedom of the individual means to support small business as the backbone of Australia, basically. It's the backbone of any economy, actually. And lower taxes. So it's a freedom of the individual. This is true liberalism, the freedom of the individual and the reduction of government. In other words, the government becomes servants of the people. You become a public servant in the government, not the other way around like it is now with Albanese. So that's true liberalism. And the unions should be under secret ballot. So there are 3 points. What is a liberal? You hear all these speeches and they just don't get down to the core values of what a liberal is. So there's 3 things there. Number one, it's the freedom of speech, or the freedom of the individual. And that's both in freedom of religion and freedom to establish business and not be hobbled by extreme taxation. So freedom of the individual. And number 2 is that the government, there's a reduction in the size of the government, and the government becomes, or should be, the servants of the people. And thirdly, unions should be under secret ballot. In other words, there's no just raising of hands to pass resolutions, which basically that leaves it, what's happened in Melbourne, the mafia takes over, the builders union, or whatever. Now, what's socialism? This is according to Robert Menzies. It's on my website. Type it in and you'll see one of Robert Menzies' old posters there that I've reposted. So what's socialism? Socialism is all about taking the freedom of the individual and institutionalising it in the government. In other words, they take away your freedom. Just see what Albanese's done over the last 3 or 4 years, or whatever it is, 4 years plus 3 years plus another one over 4 years. Slowly but surely, they're taking away the rights of the individual, or the freedom of the individual, and the government then expands itself to become the central power in your life. Everything you do is controlled by the government. That's what the socialists do. And what they also do is they bring the middle class, who are usually where all the small business people are, small to medium business, they reduce the middle class down to poverty, which they're doing here in Australia by importing, especially from the Middle East, just unvetted importing of immigrants, not quality immigrants, but just flooding the gates with it. And the purpose behind that is to reduce the middle class down to basically poverty. And their position, the government's position, expands rapidly, and the public servants wind up being the beneficiaries of all that, especially the higher echelon of the Labor and Greens parties. And these socialists go lockstep in policies with terrorists. So you look at what the Albanese's done, exactly that. Kiristema in the in the UK, it's done exactly that. He's turned the UK into a third world Islamic state. Albanese's doing the same thing. Just have a look at what they've done physically. ISIS brides, you name it. recognising Palestine, all that. And so socialism is about building the size of the government and controlling the individual. And ultimately, the next step, according to Sir Robert Menzies, and he's correct, is communism. Well, I would hazard to say that without a shadow of a doubt that Albanese, on his track record and by the evidence that we have, is a communist. And you can see every decision he makes is communism. So what's communism? Communism is simply that the government then becomes the all-over power. The government basically turns itself into God, where it has total authoritarian power over you. You have no freedom of speech, as represented by what's happening in Iran and that. And China, you know, the communist states and the Islamic states go lockstep. So the third or the fourth category that I put into these posters on Rise Up Australia Brisbane 2025 was Islam. Now, Islam is a totalitarian, fanatical, death cult religion. So there's no separation between political Islam and Islam, the religion. You can Google all this if you've got a brain to do it, or you want to believe it's a religion of peace. You're so wrong. 1400 years of expansionism, 1400 years, this is Islam I'm talking about now, 1400 years of trying to annihilate Israel and Christians and anyone else who's a non-believer. Now, the best example of Islam is Iran, which Donald Trump's hammering at the moment. Now, Iran has sponsored all the global terrorism right through the Middle East, everywhere. You know, Hezbollah, or Hamas in the Gaza Strip, sponsored by Iran. Nuclear, on the way to getting nuclear missiles, that's what Donald Trump brought to a halt very recently and continues to hammer Iran. Now, Iran has murdered 1 million of its own people, and more recently 40,000 protesters gunned down and hung. That's a totalitarian regime. If anyone should be demonstrating in the streets of Sydney, it should be against the totalitarian ayatollahs, whichever one is left of them after Trump eliminating a few of them recently. That's who you should be demonstrating against in the streets of Sydney peacefully. And then, when I think about it, who did that peacefully? Well, it was actually the Persians, who are the true Iranian people. They were the one peacefully protesting against the Ayatollah regime of mass murderers in Australia. And they did a very good job. I actually know one of the leaders of the Iranian resistance movement, and they don't want mass murderers running their country. The Ayatollahs are not Persians. They are invaders of that country. Now, how many of these Free Palestine mob, how many of them were standing up for the people who'd been slaughtered in Iran by the Ayatollahs? None. Zip. Zero. Except for the Persians. But that mob that stands up for Free Palestine, none of them were there in the Persian demonstrations. The Persians, and why? The Persians are pro-Israel. Yeah, funny about that. Right in the middle of the Middle East. They're pro-Israel. Oh, gee. Yeah. You might have to think about your whole philosophy about Israel, won't you? So they're pro-Israel and they're pro-Trump. They want Donald Trump to save them. Same as in Nigeria, where the Nigerian Christians have been, I think it's over 100,000 have been slaughtered by Islam. They want Donald Trump to save them. See, Donald Trump has become a global leader recognised not only in these countries like Nigeria and even in the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia and whatever, they all respect Trump. See, they respect people who make decisions based on righteous reasoning. Trump makes decisions based on people are being oppressed, not because they're going to gain oil or anything out of it, but he makes decisions for the right reasons. So I'll just finish off with this. Anyone who makes any statements regarding threats, or they want to even so-called, it's only a joke I said that, your words have power. Now that's getting back to this idiot in Queensland who suggested the assassination of Donald Trump would be the only thing, whatever this fool said, that she should be charged criminally for it. So, you have freedom of speech, but freedom of speech doesn't go down to the area where you threaten to murder people. You try that in court. You try and stand up in court and say, well, I didn't really mean it, but I threatened to kill someone. It doesn't work that way. I've been through a couple of recent court situations where they were trying to, without going into the detail, these days when people can sort of make up stories and they can feel as if they're threatened, and the law will basically back them up. And you've really got to defend against that. Well, they perceived that they felt threatened. So, it's sort of taken it to more of an extreme these days where you can feel you're threatened, and then, they can basically hold that one up in court these days. This is in Australia. So I had to nail one of those situations. But I got a bit of a shock. I said, what the hell? They're based on people's perceptions, not actual any fact. So you've got to be very careful what you say, and basically, especially with the freedom of speech and all the rest of it, you just make certain that there is absolutely zero intention to do harm to any other person in the process. And that's a Christian way, actually. So therefore, all the Free Palestine marches over the last 4.5 years should have, by that definition, by the legal definition of freedom of speech, been cancelled immediately. That's Graham Healy over and out. Now, make certain you go onto my website, have a look at that movie, mini movie on Pauline Hanson's vision for Australia. It's great. And then have a look at the definitions of liberalism, socialism, communism, and I put that one in on Islam, on Rise of Australia, Brisbane 2025. Look up Robert Menzies, and that one will come up on the AI. That's Graham Healy over and out for this Sunday, and the 24th of May. Have a great morning. And we're in a position of change in this country. You can see what's happening in the UK. Keir Starmer's just about gone. He'll be leaving number 10 Downing Street very shortly, and Nigel Farage will be the PM of the UK, and he's going to clamp down on the illegal immigration and all this. We need to do the same here in Australia. We need to turn Christmas Island into a detention centre, basically, and start to rid Australia of these terror cells, and there's plenty of them here. I know that, you know that. Federal police actually know that. So we've really got to purge Australia, and as Barnaby Joyce said, turn Australia back into a financial powerhouse and free the place up. Where there's been serious attempts to turn Australia into a communist cesspit. We've got to reverse that, okay? Legally and peacefully, by a change of government, and the only one that I'm advocating for these days is One Nation under Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce and Malcolm Roberts. Have a great morning. Thank you very much.